Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. My religion has three gods, and their names are Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I am not a wealthy man, but in the silent, ordered cathedral of my own financial life, I am a high priest. My credit score, a perfect, luminous 850, is not just a number to me. It is a testament, a creed, a reflection of a life lived with meticulous, almost pathological integrity. My name is Iman, and for 20 years, my obsession has been the clean, elegant, and deeply reassuring logic of a balanced ledger. I find a profound, almost spiritual comfort in the tangible, verifiable truth of a world where every debit has a credit, where every promise made is a promise kept. My professional life is an extension of this. I am a compliance officer for a small regional bank, a man who spends his days sifting through the messy, chaotic financial lives of others, looking for the small, telltale signs of disorder, of risk, of deceit. I am a cartographer of financial souls, and my own map is a masterpiece of clean lines and clearly demarcated borders. This obsession, as my wife Maeve has always lovingly called it, was born from the chaos of my childhood. My father was a man of grand dreams and catastrophic follow-through, a man who lived his life in a state of perpetual, lurching financial crisis. Our home was a landscape of pink overdue notices, of hushed late-night arguments about money, of the constant low-grade hum of impending doom. I had vowed that my own life, my own home, would be a fortress of stability, a sanctuary built on the bedrock of perfect credit and zero debt. And Maeve, my beautiful, free-spirited Maeve, was the heart of that sanctuary. She was the color in my monochrome world of numbers. A high school art teacher, she was a creature of beautiful, creative chaos. A woman who saw the world not in spreadsheets, but in textures and hues. She often teased me about my paranoia, my ritualistic weekly review of our credit reports, my almost fanatical devotion to paying every bill the moment it arrived. But she did it with a gentle, loving affection. She saw my obsession not as a flaw, but as a part of the man who had given her the one thing she had never had in her own, equally chaotic childhood, a life completely and blessedly free of financial anxiety. Our marriage was my one, true, unaudited asset. It was the one place where I did not need to check the numbers, where I did not need to assess the risk. My trust in her was the gold standard upon which my entire, carefully balanced world was built. I was the guardian of our financial walls, and she was the keeper of the life that was lived within them. It was a perfect, symbiotic system, a system I believed to be infallible. The first tremor in the foundation of that system was a single discordant note in the perfect symphony of my financial life. It was a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. A man with a tired, professionally aggressive voice, a voice I recognized from my own professional world as the voice of a debt collector. "Am I speaking with Mr. Iman Quinn?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my initial reaction one of professional annoyance. They had clearly made a mistake, a clerical error. "I'm calling from Sterling Financial," he said, "regarding a past due balance on a personal loan." "There must be an error," I said, my voice a calm, flat line of absolute certainty. "I have no loans with your company. I have no personal loans with any company. My credit is perfect." I could almost hear the man on the other end of the line smile a tired, cynical smile. He had heard this 1,000 times. "Well, sir," he said, "according to our records, you took out a $10,000 loan 6 months ago. You made 3 payments and you have missed the last 3. Your account is now in default." The number, $10,000, was a preposterous, impossible figure. It was an anomaly, a ghost in my perfectly maintained machine. I felt a surge of cold, righteous anger. I was a victim of identity theft. The thought was a violation, a desecration of the sacred, untouchable temple of my financial identity. "I am a victim of fraud," I said, my voice as cold and as hard as ice. "I am hanging up now.
I will be filing a police report and a complaint with the credit bureaus. Do not call this number again." I hung up the phone. My hands were trembling, not with fear, but with a kind of focused, analytical rage. A breach had occurred. My fortress, which I had believed to be impenetrable, had been compromised. My first call was not to the police. That was a step for amateurs. My first call was to my own internal security system. I logged into my credit monitoring service, the digital dashboard of my life. And there it was, a hard inquiry from Sterling Financial, dated 6 months ago. And a new open account, an account that was now a bleeding red stain of late payments on the pristine white canvas of my perfect credit report. My score, my beautiful, perfect 850, had plummeted by over 100 points. It was a catastrophic, almost unthinkable drop. It was a financial heart attack. I spent the rest of that day in a state of cold, controlled fury. I did what I knew how to do. I initiated the protocol. I placed a fraud alert on all 3 of my credit files. I began the long, tedious, and infuriating process of disputing the fraudulent account. I was a man who had been invaded, and I was now systematically and ruthlessly hunting the intruder. I did not tell Maeve, not yet. I did not want to worry her. This was my domain. I was the protector of our financial walls, and it was my job to repel the invaders. I would handle this. I would fix it. I would restore the perfect, beautiful order of our world. I assumed the thief was a professional, an anonymous digital phantom from a foreign country, a random casualty of the chaotic, insecure world of the internet. I hired a specialist, a man I knew through my work, a cybersecurity expert named Corbin, a reclusive genius who was a legend in the world of digital forensics. I gave him all the data I had. I wanted him to find the ghost. I wanted him to trace the breach, to find the source, to give me a name, a location, a target for my cold, righteous anger. Corbin worked for a week. I waited, my anxiety a low, constant hum beneath the surface of my calm, professional exterior. I went to work, I came home, I kissed my wife, I lived my life, all the while knowing that a hostile, unknown entity was wearing my name, was using my identity, was profaning the sanctity of my life's work. The call from Corbin came on a Friday. "I have my report," he said, his voice a dry, emotionless monotone over the encrypted line. "The news is not what you're expecting." "You found him?" I asked, a surge of triumphant adrenaline in my veins. "I found the source of the breach," he corrected. "But there was no breach, Eamon. Not in the way you think."
There was no hack. There was no phishing scam. There was no dark web data purchase. "What are you talking about?" I asked, a cold tendril of confusion beginning to snake its way around my heart. "The loan application," Corbin said, his voice a flat, dead thing. "It was submitted from your home IP address, from your wife's laptop, to be specific. The security questions, your mother's maiden name, the name of your first pet, they were all answered correctly on the first attempt. The bank account the money was wired to was opened with a social security number and a driver's license number that match yours, but the address is a P.O. box in a different town. And the signature on the application, well, it's a very good forgery of your signature, but it's not yours." I sat in my car in the quiet, underground parking garage of my office building, and the world seemed to slow down, to warp, to dissolve into a meaningless gray fog. "What are you saying, Corbin?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. "I'm saying the person who stole your identity, Eamon," he said, and there was a flicker of something that might have been pity in his voice, "was not a stranger. The calls are coming from inside the house." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor of the car. The fortress I had spent my life building had not been breached from the outside. The enemy had been inside the walls, all along.
She had not just been the keeper of the life within the sanctuary. She had been the one who had opened the gates and let the barbarians in. And the chief barbarian, the one who had led the charge, the one who had worn my name and my honor like a mask, it was her. The drive home that evening was a journey through a foreign country, a landscape that looked familiar, but whose every feature was now imbued with a new, sinister meaning. The quiet, tree-lined street we lived on no longer felt safe. It felt like a stage. The beautiful, solid, and financially secure house we had built together no longer felt like a home. It felt like a crime scene. And the woman who was waiting for me inside, my wife, my partner, my one absolute and unquestionable truth, was now a suspect. I walked through the front door, and she was there, in the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune as she chopped vegetables for our dinner. The scene was one of perfect domestic tranquility. But I was no longer a participant in that scene. I was an investigator, looking at it through a one-way mirror. "You're home early," she said, her smile as warm and as beautiful as ever. "Everything is fine?" I said, my voice a strange, hollow imitation of my own. My ability to lie, to construct a false narrative, was a muscle I had never used. I was discovering, with a sickening, cold horror, that it was surprisingly easy. The fortress of my life had been built on a foundation of absolute honesty. Now I was going to have to become a master of deceit in order to understand the true nature of the ruin that lay beneath my feet. I had to become a ghost in my own house, a silent, watchful presence, gathering data, looking for the tales, for the cracks in her perfect, loving facade. My life, which had been a study in order and control, was now a quiet, obsessive, and deeply paranoid investigation. I was auditing my own marriage. I started with the physical evidence. I waited until she was asleep, and I went through her things with the cold, methodical precision of a man searching a suspect's apartment. I went through her purse. I went through her desk. I went through the pockets of her coats in the closet. I was looking for a key to the P.O. box Corbin had mentioned, for a secret, prepaid cell phone, for the small, tangible artifacts of a secret life. I found nothing. She was clean. She was careful. Or, and the thought was a new and even more terrifying one, she was innocent, and I was a monster, a man driven mad by a single anomalous data point, a man who was now violating the privacy of the woman he loved. I needed more than just Corbin's report. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to find the money. I knew I couldn't access the secret bank account without more information, but I could trace its origins. Corbin had given me the name of the bank, a small, online-only institution known for its lax security and its appeal to those with complicated financial lives. I went to the bank's website, and I did something I had never done in my life. I committed a crime. I initiated a password recovery for an account that was not my own. I used my own name, my own social security number, but her email address, the one she used for her personal correspondence. The password reset link was sent. Then came the second part of the operation. I went to her laptop, which she always left on the kitchen table overnight. I opened it. I went to her email account. Her password was the name of our son. I felt a fresh, sharp pang of a pain so profound it was almost a physical nausea. I found the password reset email from the bank. I clicked the link, and I created a new password, a password only I knew. I was in. The account was a revelation. It was a ledger of her betrayal. The initial $10,000 deposit from the fraudulent loan was there, but that was just the beginning. The account was a thriving, active ecosystem of deceit. There were other deposits from other, similar personal loans, all taken out from small, high-interest lenders, all under my name. The total was nearly $50,000. She had not just stolen my identity once. She had been systematically farming it, harvesting my perfect credit score to fund a life I knew nothing about. But it was the withdrawals that told the real story. The money was not being spent on designer clothes or luxury vacations. It was a series of regular, consistent payments, wire transfers to a single recipient, a man named Leo Vance. And next to each transfer was a memo line, a single repeated word: investment. Investment. I did a search for Leo Vance, and the story that unfolded on my screen was the final devastating piece of the puzzle. He was a local entrepreneur, a charismatic, small-time dreamer with a history of failed, grandiose projects. His latest venture was a boutique distillery, a trendy, artisanal gin company that was going to be the next big thing. There were articles in local business blogs, glowing, optimistic puff pieces about his vision and his passion. And in one of the articles, there was a picture of him standing in front of his new gleaming copper still.
And standing next to him, her arm linked through his, her face glowing with a pride and an excitement I had not seen in years, was my wife, Maeve. The article described her as his partner and primary investor. Partner. The word was a gunshot in the silent room. She had not just been siphoning off my credit to fund a secret life of shopping and spa days. She had been funding another man's dream. She had taken the one thing I had built, my perfect, unblemished financial identity, and she had used it as the foundation for a life with someone else. My 2 decades of discipline, of sacrifice, of fanatical devotion to the principles of financial integrity, it had all just been the seed money for her lover's artisanal gin company. The betrayal was so specific, so tailored to my own personal set of values, that it felt like a work of art, a masterpiece of psychological cruelty. I sat in the darkness of my own kitchen, bathed in the cold, blue light of her betrayal, and I felt the last structural supports of the man I used to be give way. The anger was gone. The rage was gone. All that was left was a vast, cold, and strangely quiet emptiness. I was a man who had been defined by his numbers, and I had just discovered that the entire beautiful and perfectly balanced equation of my life had been a fraud from the very beginning. I knew now that I had to confront her. The quiet, covert investigation was over. The time for observation had passed, but I would not confront her with rage. I would not confront her with tears. I would confront her with the only language I had left, the language of the ledger, the language of the cold, hard, and unforgiving fact. I printed everything: the loan applications, the bank statements, the articles about her and Leo Vance. I created a dossier, a thin, perfect, and utterly damning book of her sins. I placed it in a simple black binder. It was not a collection of evidence. It was an obituary, the obituary of our marriage, of our life, of the woman I had thought she was. The next evening, I did not go home after work. I went to a bar, a quiet, dark, and anonymous place, and I waited. I had put a tracking app on her phone earlier that day, another small, necessary crime in a long series of them. I watched the small blue dot of her life move across the map of the city. She left the school where she taught. She drove to a part of town I did not recognize, and she stopped at a small, trendy-looking bar and restaurant. The same bar I saw with a quick search that housed the tasting room for Leo Vance's new boutique distillery. I paid for my drink, and I drove. I was no longer a husband. I was no longer a victim. I was a compliance officer on my way to conduct a final and deeply personal audit. The tasting room of the Vance Distillery was a parody of authenticity. It was a collection of carefully curated signifiers of craft and heritage: reclaimed barnwood, Edison bulbs, a distressed copper bar. It was a stage set designed to sell a story, a brand. It was, I thought with a cold, bitter irony, a perfect reflection of my own marriage. She was sitting at a small, secluded table in the corner, her back to the door. He was across from her, Leo Vance. He was exactly as I had pictured him from the articles: handsome, confident, a man who wore his ambition like a well-tailored suit. They were not touching, but their intimacy was a palpable physical presence in the air between them. They were leaning in close, their heads almost touching, their conversation a low conspiratorial murmur. They were partners, they were lovers, they were the architects of my ruin. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, an invisible, avenging ghost. They did not see me. They were in their own private world, a world that I had, it turned out, paid for. A walk to their table. My footsteps made no sound on the polished concrete floor. I did not speak. I simply stood there, next to their table, holding the slim black binder. It was Maeve who saw me first. Her head came up. Her eyes widened in a moment of pure, uncomprehending shock. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was looking at a ghost who was supposed to be at home, balancing his checkbook, a ghost who was not supposed to be here, in the heart of her new, secret life. Leo Vance looked up, his expression shifting from confusion to a kind of wary, animalistic hostility. He did not know who I was, but he knew I was a threat. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a low, challenging growl. I did not look at him. My eyes were fixed on my wife. "I'm just here to conduct a small, unscheduled audit," I said, my voice a quiet, calm, and utterly dead thing. I placed the black binder on the table between them, on top of their cocktail napkins and their half-eaten plate of artisanal olives. The thud of the binder on the wood was the only sound in the sudden, profound silence that had fallen over their table. "What is this?" Maeve whispered, her voice a fragile, trembling thing. "It's a ledger," I said. "I've always been a great believer in a balanced ledger. I just wanted to make sure all the accounts were in order." I opened the binder to the first page. It was a copy of the first fraudulent $10,000 loan application, with her forged signature of my name circled in red. "This was the initial investment, I believe," I said, my voice the cool, dispassionate tone of an auditor reviewing a financial statement. I turned the page. The bank statement, showing the transfer to Leo Vance. The seed money. I turned the page again. The newspaper article, with the picture of the two of them, the happy, entrepreneurial couple. The partnership. I continued to turn the pages, one by one, a slow, methodical, and silent presentation of my evidence. The other loan applications, the other bank transfers. Each page was another nail in the coffin of her lie. She just stared at the documents, her face a mask of crumbling, horrified disbelief. The beautiful, confident woman from the articles was gone, replaced by this small, terrified, and utterly exposed stranger. Leo Vance, the visionary, the charmer, was looking from the documents to her and then to me, his own face a study in dawning, panicked comprehension. He was not a mastermind. He was a small-time grifter who had latched onto a woman with access to what he thought was a bottomless well of credit. He had not known, until this very moment, the true source of his funding. He had not known that his entire beautiful dream was built on a foundation of stolen identity and a marriage that was now in the process of a very public and very messy demolition. The final page of the binder was not a document. It was a single, simple, and beautifully crafted piece of paper. It was my resignation, not from my job, from my marriage. "I believe you'll find everything is in order," I said, closing the binder. "The assets, the liabilities, the full, unaudited truth of the matter." I then did something I had not planned, a small, final, and deeply satisfying gesture. I took off my wedding ring, the simple gold band I had worn for 20 years. I placed it gently on top of the black binder. "Consider this my final contribution to the partnership," I said. And then I turned and I walked away. I did not look back. I did not wait for the explosion. I did not need to. I had not brought a bomb to their table. I had brought something far more destructive. I had brought the truth.
And I knew, with the cold, satisfying certainty of a man who has finally and irrevocably balanced his accounts, that the truth would do the work for me. The walk out of that bar, out into the cool night air, was the first step into my new and unwritten future. I was a man who had lost everything: my wife, my home, my financial security, my perfect, beautiful credit score. But as I walked, I felt not a sense of loss, but a sense of profound and strangely liberating lightness. I had lost the lie. I had lost the weight of a 20-year performance. I had lost the woman I had thought I was married to. But I had, in the process, found something else. Something I had not realized I had lost: myself. The man who believed in the truth, no matter how ugly or how painful it was. And for the first time in a very, very long time, my own personal ledger felt completely and beautifully balanced. The aftermath was a quiet, legal, and deeply impersonal affair. I did not see her again. I did not speak to her again. Our only communication was through our lawyers, two hired guns in a war that had already been won and lost in the silent space of that bar. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, was initially furious with my approach. "You had her dead to rights, Eamon," she had fumed. "Fraud, embezzlement, we could have crucified her. You could have owned that distillery." But I did not want the distillery. I did not want the money. I did not want any part of the wreckage. My only demand in the divorce settlement was a clean slate. I wanted my name cleared. I wanted the fraudulent debts legally and officially assigned to her and to him, the two partners in the enterprise they had funded. And in return, I would walk away. I would not press criminal charges. I would not sue for emotional distress. I would simply disappear from their story. It was a form of mercy, I suppose, but it was not a mercy born of forgiveness. It was a mercy born of a profound and deeply weary indifference. They were no longer my problem. Their lies, their debts, their inevitable messy collapse. It was a story that I was no longer interested in reading. They agreed to my terms with a desperate, grateful speed. The debts were transferred, the divorce was finalized, and my name, my beautiful and now deeply scarred financial identity, was legally my own again. The credit score, the number that had once been the sun in my personal solar system, was in ruins. It would take years of patient, methodical work to rebuild it. But for the first time, I did not care.
The number on the screen was no longer a reflection of my self-worth. It was just a number, a piece of data, a problem to be solved. My life in the year that followed was a study in deliberate monastic simplicity. I moved into a small rented apartment in a different town, a place where no one knew my name or my story. I kept my job at the bank, but I was a different kind of employee now. The quiet, obsessive zeal was gone, replaced by a calm, professional competence. I was good at my job, but it was no longer my religion. It was just a job. The real work of my life was happening outside the office. It was the work of rebuilding, not a credit score, but a self. I had spent 20 years defining myself by my stability, by my control, by the perfect, orderly fortress I had built. And in the end, that fortress had been a prison. Now I was learning to live in the open. I was learning to embrace a little bit of chaos. I took up hiking, a messy, unpredictable activity where the numbers on a GPS were less important than the feeling of the sun on your face and the burn in your legs. I started reading fiction again, diving into the complex, illogical, and deeply human world of stories, a world I had long ago abandoned for the clean, hard certainty of nonfiction. I was, in a sense, conducting a controlled burn of my own personality, clearing away the dead, dry underbrush of my old obsessions to see what new, green life might grow in its place. I heard about them, of course, through the quiet, inevitable gossip of the world. Their distillery, which had been built on a foundation of stolen credit and false hope, had collapsed within 6 months. Their partnership, which had been forged in the heat of a shared, illicit dream, had apparently dissolved into a bitter, acrimonious mess of accusations and recriminations. Leo Vance had left town, a ghost on the run from his own new set of creditors. And Maeve, my Maeve, the woman who had been the sun in my own former life, was, I heard, working as a waitress in a diner in a town 2 hours away. She was paying her debts. The ledger, in its own cruel and impartial way, was being balanced. I never went to see her. I never tried to contact her. Her story was her own to live. My story, my new and still unwritten story, was here. The final act of my own personal reconstruction happened on a Saturday afternoon, a little over a year after the end. I was in a small local bookstore browsing the fiction aisles, and I saw a woman, a stranger, struggling to reach a book on a high shelf. She had kind eyes and a small apologetic smile. "I'm sorry," she said. "Could you?" I reached up and got the book for her. It was a collection of poetry, a subject I knew nothing about. "Thank you," she said, her smile widening. "You're a lifesaver." We started talking about the book, about the weather, about the simple, ordinary, and blessedly uncomplicated things that two strangers talk about. Her name was Clara. She was a teacher. She was new in town. And for the first time in a very long time, I was not Eamon, the man with the perfect credit score. I was not Eamon, the betrayed husband. I was not Eamon, the ghost. I was just a man in a bookstore talking to a woman with kind eyes. "Would you," I said, and the words felt strange and new and full of a terrifying, exhilarating risk, "like to get a cup of coffee sometime?" She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw not a calculation, not a strategy, not a lie. I just saw a simple, honest, and beautiful yes. Our first date was not a grand, expensive affair. It was a simple, quiet coffee, and it was the most real and the most valuable transaction I had made in my entire life. The ledger of my past was closed. A new one, with a single, hopeful, and beautifully uncertain entry, had just been opened. Thank you for tuning in. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.